am Luba Vangelova, the founder of The Hub, which you can read more about at thehub.community. And I am here today with Elan Page. I will let her introduce herself. We're going to talk about how to work or, do paid work or take care of other responsibilities while also homeschooling. And let's hear who you are.
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you today, Luba. I am Elan Page. I am of Homeschool Our Way, which I founded to help families of color get started homeschooling. And I'm also a working mom. And so I'm super excited about this conversation because I do get the question all the time, how do you do both? So I love sharing what I know and in the hopes that it will help some folks out there as well.
All right. And I just want to also emphasize that this applies to anyone who has ongoing responsibilities outside of homeschooling their children, whether it be elder care or taking care of someone else or taking care of their own, whatever needs. So it can be broader than just holding down a paid job. But for simplicity's sake, rather than including that in every single sentence, we can just say, working parents for now, but understand that it can encompass a lot of things.
Well, and to your point, I believe that all parents are working parents,
Exactly.
whether you work outside the
Exactly.
home or not. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Exactly. Which is why I like to be specific, but it tends to get very wordy if you try to be super specific all the time. So, um, anyway, so let's start off with some context. How long have you been homeschooling? Your kids' ages? How many adults are involved in the homeschooling? The type of work arrangements that you have, and the type of homeschooling that you do.
Sure. Well, we moved to I live in Dallas, Texas. We moved to Texas about 8 years ago. At the time, I had a newborn and I had a toddler. And as that toddler began, I was commuting too, by the way. I was commuting about an hour and a half each way. And I would miss things, right? Like if my then toddler was um she was taking gymnastics at the time, and sometimes I wouldn't make it back to the side of town to be able to see her. And so I really started looking for a remote job, a job that I could work from home. That came to be at about the time that my daughter was in kindergarten. Now, she attended a private school, and then COVID, right? So as COVID happens, um, we it was that year that kind of everything shut down. The kids came home from school, and my husband and I are kind of, oh, you ask about that. My husband is in the home and he does help. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that looks like. But we're looking at her doing these virtual classes, and she was moving a little bit faster than her classmates. So she would finish up her work and then she'd kind of sit around and be a little bit bored. And so quietly, my husband and I both began kind of thinking about homeschooling kind of at the same time, because what we were seeing is we could move at her pace rather than her having to move at her classmates' pace if we were in control. And so that next school year, we began homeschooling, like full on homeschooling, not virtual schooling, or not virtual schooling with through the school where she was at the time. So we start homeschooling and it was fantastic. Then her younger sister, we were able to kind of bring her along as well because she was then starting preschool. I think she was 3 or 4 at the time. So we're able to homeschool both girls. We're able to go at our own pace. And they're very bright, very inquisitive kiddos. And so the more they wanted to learn, the more we fed them, right? And so that was a really eye-opening experience, that freedom and that flexibility that we were able to get through that homeschool experience. However, as a working mom, things were hard for me to juggle at the time. So I work in the food industry, and if you remember back in COVID, there was scarcity. There were, you'd go in the grocery stores and, some of the shelves were bare and so forth. And so my job was really demanding at that time because we were kind of working through some of those supply chain issues, blah, blah, blah. The point is, as a working mom, the next school year, I felt like, okay, we should probably send them back to traditional school so that I can kind of get my bearings. So we did that. We did that for 2 years. Year number one, both kiddos did great. They were at separate schools. One was at a private school, one was at a charter school. They did great. It was fine. The reentry back into traditional school was okay. The next year, what we experienced is that one child she's just still was like further along than her classmates. And so there was still that angst of like, well, I'm still having to kind of teach her at home. I still want to teach her at home because I want to keep her moving ahead at her own pace. For the other child, there were some issues in her classroom where the teacher didn't really have a good handle of the classroom. It was kind of disruptive. And like I said, my kiddos they're very inquisitive. They like learning. And she was like, I can't focus. I can't focus in this environment. And so we made the choice then to return back to homeschooling. And so we're in year number 2 of sort of our post-COVID homeschooling. And again, I go back to the freedom and the flexibility is really what stands out to me as what I enjoy most about homeschooling. But what I did though is I learned a lot in between sort of that first journey in homeschooling during COVID. And then when we returned to it, I made some adjustments as a working mom in between. And so that's what helped me get from one to now where I don't feel as overwhelmed. I feel more in control and we feel more organized and productive as a family.
Mhm. Okay. And so you have 2 children who are, is it? Oops.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
You were asking their ages?
Yes, 10 and 7.
That's correct. Yes, 10 and 7.
Okay. And so you've got 2 adults currently involved in their homeschooling. And do both of you have like, are you both at home much of the time and have flexible schedules, or what does the context look like?
Yeah. So like I said, I work from home.
Mhm.
My work from home involves a whole lot of meetings, a whole lot of Zoom calls. From time to time, I'll really need some like time to think strategically and kind of be uninterrupted and so forth. So that's kind of what
Mhm.
my work requirements look like. On my husband's end, he works outside the home.
Mhm.
He's actually a hairstylist. And so he goes, somewhere and works from somewhere. And he's not able to do his work from home, right? But what we do is we combine what we can.
Mhm.
And for us, what that looks like is this. So we have co-op on Mondays and on Tuesdays. On Mondays, our kiddos are in class with their co-op classmates. On Tuesdays, they go on a field trip. And so I take the kiddos to their class co-op on Mondays because I can take my computer with me and
Mhm.
I can sit down while the kiddos are in class. I can sit down and I can continue working.
Mhm.
On Tuesdays, because my husband sets his own schedule, he can
Mhm.
block out his Tuesdays, or at least the earlier part of the day, to be able to accompany our girls to on their field trip.
Mhm.
And then the rest of the days, I'm able to I'm able to basically work our 2 schedules. So the girls' learning schedule and my work schedule, I'm able to kind of work them together so that I can teach and we can continue our learning journey on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Mhm. Okay. All right. And so while you're working then on those days, Wednesday through Friday, are your girls doing independent things then, if you are in meetings and can't be interrupted?
Yeah, so this is kind of what this looks like. I call it time blocking. So I will block my schedule and their schedule according to our needs. So this is what that looks like. On Wednesdays, generally I have kind of a lighter meeting day. I'll have meetings more in the morning, and then my afternoons are more flexible. So in our home, what that might look like is in the morning, I will start out, I'll get the girls started on a lesson.
Mhm.
So we'll do the lesson together. And then whatever the activity is, or, maybe it's worksheets, maybe it's a workbook, maybe it's some sort of learning activity, they can work on that then for the rest of the morning while I am working. And then we have lunch. And then we can kind of go over the work together in the afternoon. And then we can kind of rejoin. So that, because what I don't want my kids feeling like is, well, mommy's always working. And so we're always in the other room just doing our own thing. That's not the case. But I am able to look at my schedule and say, okay, I have these time blocks where I know I'm going to be tied up. What are the girls doing while I'm doing that? And so we work it that way. Now, sometimes their dad will be with them and he'll sit with them and he'll, go over things with them. And also, I outsource. I outsource some teaching. So we have a very beloved Spanish teacher that works with my girls once a week, and that's on Wednesdays. And so their Spanish lesson, she lives in Mexico City. I do not live in
Oh,
Mexico. And so they'll hop on Zoom with her. And that's something that can also happen while I am on my own Zoom calls. They can be on their Zoom call with their instructor.
got it. Okay. And um, so so the approach that you follow with homeschooling, do you follow all-in-one curriculum? Do you do kind of an eclectic approach? Is it interest-led? Like, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as eclectic for sure.
Mhm.
What's so funny is when we started this homeschool journey, I bought an all-in-one curriculum. I
Yeah.
said, okay, let's make this
Yep.
as easy as it can be.
Yep.
And I don't really know, where to start. And funny enough, it was a curriculum that I grew up learning on, because it's not just a homeschool curriculum, it's also offered in schools.
Mm.
And so I was familiar with it. And so I went with it, right, for my own children. Well, we get this expensive, all-in-one curriculum. And I promise you, we didn't even get a month into it. And I was like, okay, don't like this, throw this out, not interested in this. This is good. This is all right. Like, I remember even the math book. My kid was I had to flip to like the middle of the book to even get to where she was on
Mm.
that first grade level. And
Mm.
so I just was like, I feel like I've spent all this money and it felt wasted.
Mhm.
And so the very next semester, I felt to myself like, okay, well, I know where my kids are at this point, right? Like, I know where they are, I know what they need to learn. Let me now start looking for curricula and for other learning resources based on the subject and
Mm.
based on how I want them to be taught, or based on their learning preference. So for example, um, I have one child who is very much an auditory learner. And
Mhm.
so I like to find lessons for her sometimes that are where she can put on some headphones and she can listen, and she gets it better than my visual learner who
Mhm.
likes to see things, right?
Mhm.
So for my visual learner, something that is maybe online where
Mhm.
she's looking at graphs and she's looking at different kinds of things, that might be better for her. So it really, I really, I like the eclectic approach because it can be more personalized, in my opinion, for the children and for their needs.
And so then how much time does this take to when you're not, I mean, obviously with, or perhaps not obviously, I guess it took a lot less time with an all-in-one curriculum until you decided that it really wasn't working or worth it. But I guess the idea was that that would be a time saver for you, whereas now you're putting in more work. So, how much time and effort do you think a parent following this approach should expect is required of them on a week by week basis?
Well, I I would say that once you once you kind of find your favorites,
Mhm.
then you put it's almost like you put in the work on the front end, right? And then you don't have to necessarily revisit to that level as you keep moving, up the ladder as the kids keep progressing. So I would say that I kind of yes, we had homeschooled before, but last school year when we came back to homeschooling, I cleared the slate and I said, I'm going to I just got like a blank sheet of paper and I said, if we're starting from scratch, what is going to be best for the kiddos? And I use a number of different things. Of course, there's Google, right? There's always Google. But what I really, really love though is going into like homeschool Facebook groups and just typing in, does anybody have a language arts recommendation? Or has anybody, used a language arts curriculum or, whatever the subject is that they really liked? And so I'll kind of start there. I also there's an education or like a school store that's right up the street from me. And so sometimes I'll go and I'll have to go in without the kids because they're distracting. They can be distracting. But I'll just go in and just kind of look around and just see what's available. And of course, again, I do this in addition to Googling and doing research online. But I like to see what's out there, but I really, really like to know what real families' experiences have been with curricula because I think I'm like most people, I just love a good referral. Like if it worked for you, then I'm interested in trying it out too. Or the reverse is if someone says, okay, don't waste your money on such and such, I've gone down that path and these are the things that I didn't like about that. Now everybody has their opinion, right? But um, if I agree with whatever the person's assessment is, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll look into something different. So again, I really like to utilize sort of that community approach
Mhm.
in terms of how I find curricula,
Mhm.
but also in terms of the actual time to get back to your original question. Sorry, um, I like to block out maybe like a weekend.
Mhm.
Block out a weekend before school starts. So a weekend like late summer.
Mhm.
And and I don't mean like I have to go be secluded, in anything, but I like to take a couple of days and just do my research and look at the year and
Mhm.
say, what do we want to learn this year? What
Mhm.
types of, are we still going to continue doing Spanish lessons or do we want to transition into French? Do we want to do swim lessons or do we want to do tennis? Do we, what are the kids interested in? Is this one really into STEM? Let's find her some STEM activities, to be able to do. Oh, this one is she enjoys acting. So let's get some, maybe some public speaking or some acting classes.
Mhm.
I really like to look at things holistically. And sometimes that takes time, right? So I'll set aside a couple of days, kind of look at all things together. I might write it down. I might scratch some things out, or I might say, oh, well, we'll do this, but we'll wait until the spring to do it. Or, oh, this will be a good summer camp activity. And I'll kind of be able to put the pieces in place so that it doesn't feel like we have to do all the things all at the same time.
Okay. And um, since parents whose kids are at school and since you have the experience of both and can kind of compare and contrast, since parents whose kids are at school also are involved with their kids, there was actually an essay written in some online publication years ago that its title was something like "We're all homeschooling. We just don't realize it or don't know, don't think of it that way." Because all parents are kind of either helping their kids with homework or just in other ways, are helping them learn things, whether they're in school or formally homeschooling. How would you compare your level of busyness with respect to your children's education now versus how much was required of you when your kids were in school, since that's also still fresh in your mind?
It is. What a great question. I think that if we're just talking about the hours, right?
Mhm.
If we're just talking about the hours or the actual time needed, it almost feels about the same, right? I think
So
what's
that's a huge, I'm sure, huge surprise for a lot of people who have not homeschooled.
Yeah, well, so I think what you have to do is you have to sit down and audit what you're doing and how you're doing it. So let's take, for example, in traditional school, doggone homework, right? Like there tends to be, I was just having a conversation with some parents a few days ago about the amount of homework that their, I think, third grader is having.
Mhm.
I think that what always bothered me with homework is, number one, y'all have been at school for 8 hours. Why couldn't you get it done there? But then the other piece of it was, by the time they get home, they're tired, they're hungry, they've had a whole long day. And then now we have to do some more work in a different setting, in a setting that more than likely the kids, it's their home, right? So they want to sit on the couch and be comfortable. They don't necessarily want to sit at a desk and continue working. So anyway, so you're working against with 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 teaching your kids in addition to traditional school. Sometimes you're working against the time that it takes mentally to even get the kids into whatever it is that you want to get them into.
Mhm.
And if it's on like a Saturday morning and you want to do something, they may or may not be in the mood then either. So sometimes it's you're pulling teeth with the
Mhm.
kids because they're just not into it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and that's a time suck, right? But what happens, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
What happens from a homeschool standpoint is when the kids wake up in the morning and they're used to a certain routine, we get right to work.
Mhm.
And we get right to work, we accomplish what we need to accomplish, and the day doesn't drag on and on and on, and I'm not fighting. We get done what we need to get done in the amount of time that it takes. So, I said all that to say it might take me 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon just to get the kids to complete, 2 homework assignments. In homeschool, we're done with our day at
Mhm.
2 or 3 hours. And so that's why I say that the time looks different. It might be at different times of the day,
Mhm.
but it's if you are efficient,
Mhm.
it doesn't really take more time to homeschool. If anything, you're getting done what you need to get done, and it might take less time.
Wow. That's a good way to encapsulate it. I mean, it certainly, rings true from, uh, I mean, what pretty much, I hear a lot of people say this, but I think it still would come as a surprise to a lot of parents who have not actually experienced it themselves.
Well, because
Um,
they're probably used to experiencing the angst of the pulling teeth and and I hear a lot of people say, um, oh my gosh, you must have so much patience because when we tried to
right.
homeschool during COVID, it
Right.
did not go well. And
Yeah.
I understand that. I
Yeah.
understand that because the COVID situation was it was a traumatic time. It was a time that no one expected
Mhm.
to come and to happen. So it's not like it's routine. It's
Yeah.
not like it was planned. It's,
Right.
those things, when something is routine, when something is planned, when something is set up in a way that you can be successful,
Mm.
it will inevitably be easier. I'm not saying that homeschooling is easy, but I
Mhm.
am saying that there are ways to set it up so that you can be efficient and can get things done, and it's not hopefully as frustrating perhaps as the experience was a few years ago when our whole worlds were just
Right.
upended.
And I think some other things that come into play are that if you do start experiencing angst, and perhaps this happened when you were using the all in one curriculum and was part of the reason why you switch things up, is you have the freedom and like flexibility, as you were saying, to pivot. If there is angst showing up on a regular basis, do something different. You have the ability to do something different. You aren't like stuck with continuing to do that. And I remember having a conversation a few years back with another parent, and we were talking. It was in the context of an in-person co-op, and we were both on the board and talking about switching some other things up or whatever, and how it would take more time. But I pointed out, yes, it might take more time, but it'll take less energy. Because you were talking about, the time suck, but I think even more than it being a time suck, it comes down to energy suck.
Yes,
Because you can spend a lot of time on something, but feel like you didn't really spend much time on it at all. And you're feeling like, refreshed and, not that exhausted. Or you can spend a little bit of time on something and just be absolutely drained because it was such an energy, suck. Um,
absolutely.
so I think all of those things also play into it. And so, well, so you were kind of initially thrown into homeschooling, but when you were like, what do you, since you also consult with families, what are the main concerns of parents who have other responsibilities and are considering homeschooling? What are their like top three concerns?
Well, we've touched on one, and that is if they uh to your point, no matter what the other responsibilities are, and we all have them, how can I manage? How can I balance everything? How can I go about doing this and not be an exhausted shell of
Mhm.
myself at the end of the day? So that's one piece, and that is a big piece. One of the other things is whether you have very sort of social kiddos or very outgoing kiddos or not, kids want to be kids and kids want to play with their peers. They want to interact with their peers. And that's never going to go away.
Mhm.
And so one of the concerns I know that I had personally, and I have talked to many, many parents, especially if you have maybe an only child,
Mm,
is okay, but hold on, when are my kids going to get a chance to be
right,
kids
right.
and to be able to interact with their peers. So that's definitely a big one. And I know we can talk more about, the specifics of how to address that. I think the other thing is imposter syndrome from the standpoint of the parent. So can I, who was not an education major. I have never taught in the classroom. I barely remember, my algebra, concepts or like whatever it is. Am I qualified to teach my own child?
Mhm,
And so that one, I think that one is the one that I try to tackle first,
mhm.
because after you get past that, you can do anything, right?
Right,
So yeah, so just tackling that imposter syndrome and really encouraging parents that you are your child's first teacher anyway. You
right.
may or may not have realized it, but you are.
Mhm.
And more than that, you are also their lead. You are also, whether you can teach the algebra or not, you can find someone who can do it, right? And so at the end of the day, you're the hub. You're the, this is apropos, but you are the, as the parent, you are the hub. You are the
Right.
curator of the education experience. And that much, whether you know how to teach the details or not, what
Mhm,
you know how to do is to find the resources,
mhm,
find the people,
mhm.
find the experiences and the environment that is best for your child. And that much you can do all day long, and you will continue to do because you're the parent.
So it's interesting because, like 10 years ago, which is when uh, more than 10 years ago now, um, got my first exposure to this world. The homeschooling ecosystem was just a fraction of what it is now. So it was actually a lot easier in a lot of ways because there were fewer options. Now there's almost decision fatigue because there are so many options for
Yes.
classes, activities, programs, et cetera, et cetera. So so you mentioned, you go onto Facebook groups, you Google and so on. Um, and um, so we covered that. But the other concerns then, since I assume that's also what you recommend, that the parents you talk to also do. Um, what about the other two things? And we talked about the first one, how to manage and balance things and not be exhausted. What about the second one, then, the play and interaction with peers? How do you advise parents to um, meet that need and allay that concern?
Well, the first thing I love pointing out is it doesn't all have to look the same.
Right.
And you have options. I hate to even say that now because I know you said that there's decision fatigue, and that is true. That's absolutely true. But just understanding, like I think as we think about traditional school, we're used to seeing things happen one way,
Hmm.
right? So um, you have classmates in a school building, period.
Hmm.
And if your child wants to play sports, it has to be done through the school, period. Like it's, if they want to do after school activities or if they want to do additional activities, they have to be after school, period. Like there are just certain things that like after you break out of that mindset that your kids' classmates don't have to necessarily be in their school or they don't have to be found in a school building,
Hmm.
their extracurricular activities don't necessarily have to be tied to your school.
Hmm.
And also your community, the people that you interact with don't necessarily have to live in your local community.
Hmm.
Yet you can still have community. Imagine that. So
Hmm.
once you sort of break free from that, it opens up a whole new world of, okay, well, how can I, again, I say that the parent is the curator of the child's experience. How can I curate an experience
Hmm.
that is going to be beneficial for my child?
Hmm.
So in terms of academics and being able to see classmates and interact with classmates often, um, you can go in person, you can go virtual, like the hub, right? So I would say that for in person, we found a lot of success with co-ops,
Hmm.
but it doesn't have to just be a co-op, right? There are also micro schools that might have, if you want to do a sort of a hybrid experience, you
Hmm.
want them to maybe be in classes for a
Right.
couple of days out of the week, and then you want to be able to homeschool them the rest of the time. There
Mhm.
perhaps is that option, right? Um, with co-ops, there are different types of co-ops, right? So our co-op is very learning based, but there are also
Mhm.
just social fun co-ops. There
Mhm.
might be I've seen co-ops that they basically just get together for the kids to have their physical, playtime. So they
Mhm.
might happen at a gym. They might happen at a playground where you just know that, every day at noon or, twice a week at noon or whatever, you're meeting up with the same friends, the same, families so that your kids can go and play, get their exercise. Perhaps they bring in a PE instructor or something like that to be able to facilitate things. But nonetheless, different co-ops have different purposes.
Right.
And so being able to find something that works for you is of benefit.
Mhm.
I want to go back though to our virtual communities and virtual learning experiences. My own children have had lots of success with virtual learning. I know that it's not necessarily for everyone. There might be, students who maybe they just have trouble, tracking with information virtually. But for those who do enjoy it, you're still seeing classmates. You're still getting a chance to see, talk with, interact with classmates, interact with instructors. And so that is a part, and my kiddos look forward to it too, right? Like, oh, it's time for, such and such a class. And they know, the students on there, they know them by name. Of course, they're looking forward to seeing their instructor. Let's not overlook, our virtual opportunities in that way.
Right. Um, and so let me just flip back over here. So, in terms of who can make this work for them, so I know like in the pool of homeschool people I know, There were quite a few where there were either two parents with both of them had paid jobs of some sort. Um, I mean, some were self-employed, some, were employees. Some had more flexibility, some had less. But I have actually personally known families with two parents who both worked outside the home with set hours, and they managed to homeschool. It was, of course, a much harder task. And I mean, they had to arrange for, carpooling with other parents whose kids were, going to the same homeschool enrichment center on the same days, or could, the parents who had more time and flexibility, and could maybe take on some of the transportation or some of the activity leading, sometimes in exchange for money, sometimes, just whatever, social exchange way it was done. And I have also known people who were single parents without another parent in the picture and had jobs with some flexibility, who homeschooled. And again, I mean, yes, they relied on a lot of organized things where they weren't, the sole person doing a lot of things, and so on. But in your experience and in talking to other parents, who do you find this works well for? I mean, how organized do you need to be, for instance? How much outside support do you need to be able to marshal in order for this to work?
Well, I think from an organization standpoint, I use what I call a loose framework. So it allows us, I talked about like the time blocking that I do. I do these chunks of time, like 2, 3 hours of time where I generally know what we're doing, what I'm doing, what the kids are doing, what both, what everybody's doing. And I feel like if you at least can approach your days and your weeks in that way, then it helps you to fill in the gaps, right? So
Mhm.
if there are, to your point, if a parent, works outside the home and they know, okay, from this hour to this hour, I am not able. I am not able to be with the kiddos. Then they can at least begin looking at, okay, well, so what are our other options? Are there other families we can partner with? Do I have family members who are nearby that can be trusted to sit with a child while they're doing a virtual class, or take them to soccer practice, or like whatever that might look like? Or are there um are there communities, are there micro schools, that kind of thing, where I can drop off and I
Mhm.
know that at a certain time I can come back, and then that takes care of that, block of time. It helps to just kind of assess at the beginning, assess your schedule, and assess what you want your kid's schedule to look like,
Mhm.
and then kind of go from there.
Mhm.
What also helps, though, and I know this might sound a little more kind of fluffy, but setting goals at the beginning um, will sort of help you talked, Luba, about the decision fatigue, and that there are a lot of resources and options and that kind of thing out there. But when you're able to set goals at the beginning and to really identify, okay, I want my kids' learning experience or my kids' days to look like this. I want them to be able to learn this. I want to make sure that they have this. Then it helps you find the exact things that you need, as opposed to going on the World Wide Web and just sort of being, thrown a million things at one time. So, for example, and I forgot to actually mention this a second ago. Um, Athletic experiences are something that is important to me, and my children enjoy it. And so, knowing that, I can look at the beginning and I can say, okay, let me find a sport for one and a sport for the other. And I've already identified what the goal is. The goal is to find an athletic activity. Then I can identify, well, what does my schedule look like as a working parent? What options are there? Now that I know that, what options are there? Are there things that happen during the day? where I can, as long as I make sure that I can get the kids there, that they can participate in, are these things that are these things that have to happen after school, or like the after school hours? Are these weekend things? Like, then you can kind of figure that piece out. And then you can figure out how to really incorporate that into your day and who can help you get to that. Is it a parent? I mean, is it a grandparent? Is it another member of the team, and their family is pitching in to help you get the kids to and from? That's just one example, but it helps to kind of start at the beginning, kind of clear your vision and look and see what you want, and then go from there. Otherwise, you're just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall, and that can be frustrating. So that's that piece of organization that I think helps on the front end.
Mhm. Okay. And any other kind of challenges that you've encountered and ways that you found to manage them that maybe took you by surprise along the way?
Yes, this is so moving from last year, again, which was my first year back homeschooling after COVID, to this year. One thing that I realized I did last year, and I don't think I really realized it until the summer, is the fact that I overscheduled.
Mm,
I had too many activities. My kiddos are social. Like they enjoy being with other kids and they enjoy doing things. So I think I approached it from the standpoint of, okay, well then we got to have 1,000,001 activities to do.
mm,
Like they have to be somewhere, different at all times of the day and all times of the weekend. And I was worn out. I was
mm,
absolutely and positively worn out. And I
mhm,
think that sometimes when you look at it, less is more,
mhm,
because the amount of time that we save when I kind of um, narrow down some of the activities, right? And we're not doing quite as many, then we get to spend more time together. Imagine that. Like as a family, we get to spend more time together. We get to incorporate some of the learning that perhaps may have been missed before. So I think that going back really quickly, because I think these two are related.
mhm,
One of the concerns that I also had when I very first started homeschooling is it wasn't just, am I qualified to teach my kids? It was also, will I keep them on track? I don't want my kids to get behind because of something that I did. And um, I think that scheduling too much stuff leads to not having enough time for the academics, not having enough time for studying, not having enough even downtime just to catch your breath and to be able to then, like I said, learn in an efficient way because the kids are too doggone tired because I've overscheduled them.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think that that's one of the big things that I did. I approached this school year very differently than I approached it last year, because last year I was trying to overcompensate because we were transitioning from traditional school to homeschooling. And
mhm,
this year I'm understanding that it doesn't it doesn't take as much as you think it takes.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've hit on a lot of important and hopefully useful points. So thank you. And if any parents would like to know more about if they would like to follow up and get more advice from you individually, can you just mention your website?
Absolutely. So my website is homeschoolourway.com. I also, if there are parents who are new to this here homeschool thing, I do have so I'm a podcaster. I have a little mini podcast called Start Homeschooling. That's just a few quick episodes that will kind of give you the basics of how to get your bearings and to be able to start homeschooling without hopefully the decision fatigue and so forth that we were talking about. So that's
Yeah.
homeschoolourway.com/start.
Okay. Well, thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.